So let's talk a little bit about non-judgment. Non-judgment is one of the most lovely practices that we can give to ourselves. I'm laughing because I just tried starting this video several times and and had to, take space to not judge myself for restarting a couple of times. Judgment is one of those things that we get trained to really young, right? It's part of growing up in a world where, as small people who don't know about the world around us or how the laws work, how society works, how people interactions work, how cars work, that fire is hot, that we need to be trained those things. We need to be taught those things. And as we learn, our society, I see a move away from it with a lot of current parenting practices, gentle parenting. But historically, we've done a lot of reward and punishment. And and still that happens, right? It's kind of like the option that our society has built up that now we're evolving out of, because that does cause a cycle internally of judgment, of internal critic coming up in our subconscious, of punishing and rewarding ourselves, which all involves judgment. So, how do we approach the world with non judgment? I like to think about this as practicing with myself for clarity, right? The more authentic I am, the more supported I feel, which ultimately comes from inside, right? The more I'm showing up for myself with self care and allowance for authentic expression, the more clarity I have on my boundaries. And the more I'm able to notice when something, a circumstance or a behavior around me feels uncomfortable for me, crosses a boundary for me, recognize that and assert my boundary without making the other person wrong. There are some pretty egregious examples coming to mind where, like racism, bigotry of any type, really, um, sexism, again, that just goes back into bigotry, but aggressive behaviors, where it can be really tempting to make the other person wrong. But what happens when we do that is we give a piece of our power away. And I'm not going to tell you, I'm not here to tell you how to process your trauma or your experiences, because experiencing an ism, experiencing some kind of bigotry or hate or abusive or aggressive behavior is something that we have to process. And for each of us, that looks a little different. I know some tips and techniques that can help with that, but only if it's appropriate for your journey, right? For all of us, that can look a little bit different. And still, in every journey, there's room for more non judgment. Because when we judge something, we create a relationship with it. So if we create a relationship with a behavior that's coming from a place of fear or a place of hatred, then we have a relationship with that thing, right? We have a relationship with hatred in that area. And that's something that we have to carry. If I resent someone for showing up aggressively toward me, then I'm carrying that resentment. I don't know what happens to that person after they leave. I believe that karma catches up with them and finds a way to teach them. But I don't know what that looks like. What I do know is that if I'm able to process my experience instead of carrying it forward with me, then I'm more free. And part of what that freedom means is an ability to recognize and assert my boundaries, right? My needs in a situation, creating both more empathy and patience within me and less tolerance for people crossing my boundaries. Those things kind of go hand in hand, even though they almost sound like they would butt heads. But they go hand in hand because when you show up as authentically yourself and someone puts you down or tries to put something on you because they're making assumptions about you, when you're authentically yourself, you know that it's not about you. And all of this touches the practice of non-judgment. When I show up without judgment, I'm able to see what's really in the room with me. And if someone is showing up with hate, I'm often able to see the wounded child within them. It doesn't always make the situation better, but it absolutely always gives me more space. And that inner space gives me more clarity about how to move through it, how to get myself out of there, and maybe how to support the other person depending on the situation and what I'm available for, because every day is different. So I suggest in practicing non-judgment that we start with ourselves. When you are able to show up just radically accepting yourself, allowing yourself to have more availability for kindness, honesty, directness, whatever qualities you believe are really you, one day and less on the next because we're tired or you haven't eaten or you've been affected by circumstances. When you're radically just able to accept yourself, period, then you have more space. And as within, so without. It's something that gets said in the metaphysical community all the time. But it's true. Because the more, and so it's said all the time because it's true, because the more space we have within, the more we're able to create space without. The more we're able to offer space without, to hold space for each other. So I invite you to practice non-judgment, to simply consider, and to start with yourself, to notice if you're judging yourself and not to go into a judgment spiral about that. Don't judge your judgment. But to just notice and ask yourself what you need to either get to move to the other side of the judgment, to move through it, right? Because we can't really ever let something go or put something down, but we can move through. We can learn what caught our attention, process that, offer ourselves the support that we need, and then get to a place on the other side where we're not as affected by it. Non-judgment is one of the practices that I'll be going over in the upcoming forgiveness class that I'm teaching with the Planned Happiness Institute. I'm going to drop that link in the description. If you want to join me for the class starting this January, it's heavily discounted as an exciting way to jump into 2025. No matter what, I hope that you'll practice a little bit with non judgment and just notice how it supports you. I love me. I love you. I love us. I'll see you soon.